So Marty mentioned a couple of things while I was in the room. She mentioned interviews, but she also mentioned information. And that's really what I'm here to talk about. Yes, we're going to talk about some strategies for more successful interviewing, but the biggest thing to keep in mind is that really what we're talking about is information. And for you all, we're talking about essential pieces of information that you need in order to get your creative ideas where they need to be. You need pieces of information, and the way to get that is, yes, to come to the boot camps. They're going to provide you information. But as Marty said, you're going to go out and you're going to talk to people, and some of you over here said you like to talk to strangers. Some of you over here said maybe not so much. But you have to talk to strangers in order to get those essential pieces of information, and there's a way to do that effectively and a way not to. I was thinking this morning about this particular presentation, and my phone was ringing, and the number said United States one time, a Hosky. I don't know. You know how the robocallers are now. It doesn't matter where they're calling from. They're trying to make us identify by making it a stopped answering my phone unless I recognize the number. How many of you have done that as well? Right. It's a defensive mechanism because I know that it's a robocaller. It's somebody, a telemarketer, who's calling to ask me questions or to get information from me. Now, I consider those robocallers a pain in the neck, but they consider me absolutely essential, and all of you too, because they need us. That's why they're so doggone persistent. That's why the numbers, they keep changing their scheme. It used to be, and I don't remember how many years ago this was, that you could put your name on the do not call. It's supposed to call you. Well, I tried that. They got around that, and now they just, I don't know who it is or where they are, but it seems as though they just hit banks of numbers, and if they get somebody, yay, that's a good day for them, bad day for us. And if they don't get somebody, they'll either call back or just go to the next number on the list. Once again, I consider them to be a complete and total pain, and they consider me to be essential. Now, that's an interesting twist because that's how some people are going to view you. You need them for your interviews because you need the information that they can supply, but guess what? They don't need you. How many of you have ever been somewhere, maybe walking on campus, walking downtown, and someone will approach you and say, hey, can I ask you a few questions? And you just brush on by because you certainly don't want to take time to do that. I've had that experience. Have any of you? Right. Somebody needs some information. Well, that's not an effective way to ask someone if they can interview you. Hey, can I ask you some questions? I don't think so because, right, I don't know what questions you're going to ask. I don't know if they're going to be personal, if I'm going to like them, if they're going to be political or religious or you name it, whatever they might be. So let's talk briefly about some of the more effective ways for you all to go about your interviewing. And that's going to include primarily face-to-face, but we'll also just mention telephone interviews in case that becomes important for you too, because that is, I mean, our phones are kind of our lifeline. All right, so here are some tips for making your interview successful. Number one, you want to plan those questions in advance. And I'm going to put a little caveat on that. You always want to think about what are the essential questions that I need to ask, but then you've got to leave a little bit of leeway because as you're asking questions, and say you're interviewing me and I'm responding to your questions, I might provide some information that leads to another question that wasn't on your original list, but it opens the door for you to get some extra valuable information. I know that I've watched people interview on television or news shows or just interviews, but usually on broadcast of some kind. And the interviewer has their notes or their iPhone or their iPad out, and their eyes are just really tied to whatever that is. So they'll ask their first question, and then the camera will focus on the person who's responding. And they'll be answering the question, and when it goes back to the person who's asked the question, their eyes are often back down on the sheet of paper, waiting for the person to finish responding so they can go on to their next. You need to know what your next question is, but you're going to have time to look down and remind yourself. You need to listen. Marty mentioned active listening. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment too. Absolutely, because I can't tell you how many times I've been interviewing somebody and I didn't have a particular question on the list, but their answer was so different than what I expected, and it led to a whole different line of questioning that really gave me better information than I was going to get if I just stuck to my script. So plan them in advance, but always have some flexibility. Number two, take some moments, you're not going to have much time, to build some rapport with your interviewee. I gave you the example of someone just saying, hey, do you mind if I ask you some questions? No, there's no rapport built there. It makes me nervous, it makes me uncomfortable. For you all, you want to make sure that you let someone know why you need to identify yourself and your purpose. I'm involved with this very innovative program that's associated with ECU. Here's what we're doing. In order for me to be successful, I need to get some information. May I take 5 to 10 minutes of your time and ask you some questions about my product, my service, whatever it is? Well, that doesn't take you very long. Now I'm at ease because I think, oh, related to the university, must be some kind of educational thing. I'm happy to help if I've got the time. Mostly, I'll probably say, sure, I'd be happy to do that, whether that's on the phone or in person, because now I know who you are and we've taken a moment. And if you say, I know you might be busy, I'd really appreciate some moments of your time, that helps build rapport. My husband's in the investment side of banking and he has to do cold calls some days, and I've listened to him sometimes, and when he was first starting out many, many years ago, he had to hit a certain number before he could even get his office open, etc. The first thing he always does when he calls somebody is ask them if this is a convenient time for them to have a few minutes to chat with him. I've never heard him start any other way. That's the way to build rapport. I know you're busy, I know it's lunchtime or it's 3 or whatever it is. Do you have just a few minutes for me to talk with you? They can then say no, but here's when a good time would be, or most of the time we usually reconsider and we'll say, well, actually, sure, I've got about 10 minutes. And then you really want to be respectful of the time parameters. Don't tell somebody you only need 5 to 10 minutes and then really you've got enough to ask them for 20 or 25 minutes. All right, third, ask the question, listen to the answer, but don't be afraid to not pop right in with the next question. Sometimes that silence leads the person to continue to add just a little bit more to their answer, and you get a little bit of extra information that turns out to be incredibly valuable. Most of us get nervous with silence, and so we fill it up. Sometimes it's great, and I don't mean just let the silence drag on for another 2 minutes, but a few 10, maybe 12 seconds just to make sure they're done and they're not just thinking about the next thing they're going to say is really valuable for you. And then 4, and I know Marty mentioned this and I cannot reiterate it enough, listen carefully to the answers. So many times people just nod their heads and they're not really listening, and then you come back and you ask a follow-up question that the respondee truly just answered. I've heard that so many times in live television, recorded interviews, professor interviews. Students come to me to interview me. They'll even say, may I record this? And they'll get out their phone. Sure, you can record it. They're tied to their script. They ask me a question, I answer it, and then they turn right around and they repeat the question because they weren't really listening. And I think, why aren't you listening? I'm giving up my time. So listen carefully. Just be careful about not moving ahead too quickly. Let them finish. Listen to what they say. Marty did mention active listening and passive listening, and I want to mention the difference there, but I also want to mention that there's a difference between listening and hearing. And you probably know this, but you may not think about it very much. But hearing, we hear all the time. We hear lots of things that we don't pay any attention to. It just becomes noise in the background. I was driving over here today and something came on, I think it was a news, I don't even know what I was listening to, but there was a little news blurb. Well, I'd already heard that news this morning, which is the only disadvantage of 24-hour news cycles and the internet and smartphones and everything else, is not really news as the day goes on. And so I just tuned it out because I was looking at the sky and I was looking at the fact that it was just seemed to be a nice day and I knew it was not going to be quite as cold. It doesn't matter. I was just tuning it out. There wasn't anything of value there for me. Hearing. Did I say listening? Hearing is physiological. We just hear all the time. Listening is when we actually engage our brain. We actually think about what we're hearing. We want to listen, to understand, to comprehend so that we can respond. So while our ears will always hear many, many things during the day, we're pretty selective about what we decide to actually tune in and listen to because our time is valuable and we're busy people. You've got a lot of stuff going on. But it's amazing, if you just think about your day, what do you actually tune into? What's valuable enough in your mind to stop, tune in, and try to understand? And there are some things that are pretty difficult, and so I just really stop trying to listen because it's over my head. And that sometimes it's stuff that's simple for somebody else, but it's I don't even know, probably algebra, calculus. If somebody was talking about those, I would just tune out immediately because those are tougher for me. How many of you are good at math in here, though? So you'd probably like that. You guys would like that conversation? Yes, I'd be tuning it out. Right. And then the difference between active and passive listening, many of us become passive listeners, but active listening is truly so much more beneficial, and it's what you absolutely want to do throughout this process. Every time you come here and listen to Carlisle and Marty and the other speakers that are in here, but definitely when you're doing your interviews, those information gathering sessions. And passive listening means that we kind of hear your voice, but we're not really tuned in. We don't give you feedback. Our eye contact is not going to be great. We just are not really quite there. Active listening, we want to understand you. We give you eye contact. We might lean forward, which you should do to show that we're engaged, to show that we're interested, nod your head or say, yes, I understand, something that lets us know listening that you're comprehending. That's active listening, and you'll find that throughout a lot of your day you're doing more passive listening than active listening, and there may be legitimate reasons for that. You've got a long car ride, and so you're just really, I don't know what you listen to in your car, but if you're listening to the radio, you're just flipping channels, just trying to find something that captures your attention, or maybe a good music station with music that you actually recognize. When we do the passive listening, as you can see down here, there is no engagement, there is no response, which I find to be very difficult if someone doesn't give me any response, and truly the person is not understanding what you say, and they're not giving me any indication that they're not understanding. There are some types of non-listening. This is one that probably every one of us have engaged in, pseudo-listening. It means fake listening. I'm looking at you. So if you're interviewing someone, you're looking at them and they're looking at you, and maybe you're even smiling at them, but you're already thinking about the next person and who am I going to find next, and am I going to be able to get enough people to interview? And so we're pretending to listen, but we're not really. Anybody ever faked listening? Because I'm right there at the top of the list. Yes, we all have, absolutely. There's also glazing over. Wow, we're not interested and we don't even pretend. So maybe I've got my phone out, or I'm looking out the window, or I'm scribbling a grocery list because I'm going to stop by the grocery store maybe on my way home, or I'm thinking, what would I like to eat on Super Bowl Sunday? What snacks should we have? But I'm not even giving you my eye contact and things like that. And if you're an interviewer, that is going to kill that interview, because we will pick up on that so quickly. And then we're just disengaged with you. If you're not interested in us, we're certainly not going to be interested in you. Ambushing sounds like a big physical act, but it's not. What it means is that we focus on the weaknesses of a speaker or an interviewer, and we forget about the strengths. So maybe you didn't do a great job setting that rapport. We still give you our time, but we're thinking, oh, this is going to be a waste of my time because you forgot to introduce yourself, or say, hi, how are you, or how's the weather, something like that. Or maybe you say the name of your product or your service, and it just gives us a negative feeling. We don't wait to hear what it's all about. We just maybe don't like the sound of it, and so we can shut down that way. That's what ambushing is all about. And I have to admit, I've done that sometimes too. I know someone will propose something. Maybe it's a policy, maybe it's a new rule, maybe it's just a new something in the grocery store, and I think, yeah, I don't really need to pay attention to that. And then if I actually pay attention, I think, oh, well, that actually has some pretty good benefits to it. I just maybe don't like the name, or I just don't like the color of the box, or something that seems to be silly in retrospect. All right, and then there's dismissing. We've all done this one before. You start talking and we say, oh yeah, I know that already. And we don't really listen, and so that can be a problem. So when you're interviewing, you want to use that active listening, and you want to make sure that you don't do any of these fake listening or non-listening type techniques, because I promise you the person with whom you're speaking will pick up on that so very quickly. We're pretty tuned in. Going along with that, and I know Marty mentioned this as well, you want to pay attention to your body language. Now, you want to pay attention to what the interviewee is doing, but they're going to be tuned in to what you're doing as well. So you want to make sure that you establish really solid eye contact when you interview. This is such a sign of respect when you're face-to-face with people. And with our screens and our phones and our computers, some of us have lost the art, the knack of really good eye contact. And it doesn't mean a stare-down contest in any way, shape, or form. It just means looking someone in the eye for 2 to 3 seconds, glance away, come back, but not looking over their heads or at their ear or at their shirt or something else. This can be hard, especially when you're one-on-one and you're very close to somebody. When you're farther away, it's a little bit easier, but it can be a little intense, especially with someone we don't know well. The facial expressions, we talked about that building rapport at the beginning of your interview. We just want to make sure that your facial expressions say that you're approachable, that you're friendly, that you have the person's best interest in heart. You're not there to deceive them in any way. You're just trying to get information that's going to benefit you for a very good reason. Posture. Most of you, I'm imagining, will be seated when you do an interview because, on the other hand, you might just get somebody if you're out on the street and you might be standing. Either way, I would just suggest that you stand up straight when you are standing. Try not to fidget because that will make the person that you're interviewing wonder why you're uncomfortable. But if you are seated, sit up straight and lean forward just a little bit. That indicates that we are interested. And if you're standing talking to someone, you might have your phone out or you might have asked them if you could record it or you might be going to take notes. But you just want to make sure that you don't stand with your arms folded or in some way that says to them, I'm not really interested in what you have to say. I'm not really approachable. You're asking them for a favor, some of their time, and so you want to make sure that you're always approachable and that your posture indicates that you are interested and that you're not slouching or acting as though you just don't really want to be there. I mean, this with our kind of all hunched over, looking at our notes, that indicates I'm asking you if I can have time, but I'm really not that engaged in what I'm doing. And you all are, because these are your ideas. And then your gestures. You just want to be careful that you don't do something that's very distracting that will keep the person that you're interviewing from paying attention to the actual questions. Do you get a little nervous? Some of you might be. I know it doesn't sound like you should be nervous when you're interviewing someone, but these will be strangers, and you are asking them for their time, and this is something that's important to you. So do you repeatedly tuck your hair behind your ears if you're a female, or maybe stroke your beard or mustache, or tug on an earring, or do you repeatedly look at your stopwatch? Even if you're not reading a text, your smartwatch, if you look at it, that's distracting. It's as bad to me as someone who keeps pulling up their phone and checking something on there. They're both equally distracting. Really be engaged for that 30 minutes or that 45 minutes of time that you're interviewing, I don't know how many different people, 5 or 6 different people, or for the 5 minutes that you spend with each person. Truly give them your attention and be careful of those distractions. A couple other things. You want to be careful not to use closed questions. You want to use open-ended questions. Closed questions are things that you find on an exam. What date did something happen? 1842. That's a closed question. There's a 1-word or a 2 to 3-word answer, but it doesn't give you any information. A 1-word answer is not going to be helpful to you. So you want to ask those open-ended questions. So instead of saying, are you happy with the current product that you use for blah, 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 I'm going to say yes or no, or maybe not really. Well, that doesn't help you a bit. Do you like using the product? Once again, I'm limiting your answers so much. Who makes it? Again, that's just too limiting. When do you use it? Where do you use it, etc. Now, closed or open questions are so valuable to all of you. I'm asking for you to expand on things. I'm asking for your thoughts, your feelings, and your interests in the way I ask that question. So I've just given you some examples up here. You can phrase your own, but you want to think about the fact that you don't want someone to be limited. You don't want to limit their answer to this much, 1, 2, maybe 3 words. You want them to talk for a couple of sentences, a paragraph even if it's helpful to you, but you want them to give you information, and they can't do that with closed questions. So be careful on how you frame your questions. Just think about words that you use. How is always a good one, or why. Or I've just given you those examples, but there are many, many others, and you'll come up with some excellent ones yourself. I'm going to skip those examples because I think you've got that. And then how about leading questions? Oh, we do this all the time. Our parents have probably done it for us. How many of you are parents in the room? I bet because I'm a parent too, I bet you've done this with your children, maybe spouses, partners, etc. A lot of times a leading question tries to lead you to a certain answer. So that's why people will say, well, most of the faculty here at ECU believe that the blah, blah, blah is really a negative thing. Don't you think that's right too? Well, golly, I'm just trying to tell you how to answer that question, because if you think I'm now going to say, well, no, actually, I don't agree with that at all, because you've just told me that all these faculty members at ECU believe that something is really negative, even if I don't agree with that, I'm probably not going to say anything about it because I'll feel that I'm wrong. or that you're going to judge me in some way. So don't lead your interviewee. You want to just ask that open-ended question and be very careful that you're not leading them in a particular direction, because you might like the answer, but it's really not going to benefit you in the end. You need to know their honest opinion and get that honest bit of information so that you can then move forward to the next step with your project. And then finally, the phone interviewing tips. Phones are fantastic, and I love the fact that we all have smartphones, even though it really means you never get to go on vacation because you take your email and everything else with you, but still, they serve a wonderful purpose. But a lot of times we forget about just common etiquette and good informational gathering techniques over the telephone. So these are, I think they make sense. When you're going to call someone on the phone to do a little interview, you want to make sure you choose your location. I know sometimes if I go for a walk in the late afternoon or the early morning, my sister will call me because she has a bit of a commute, and I'm talking to her, but I'm also in competition because there are buses, school buses going by me. On Friday morning in my neighborhood, the garbage truck is going around, the birds are singing, the wind might be blowing. That would not be a great location for my sister, because I can say, hey, hang on a minute, the school bus is going by. I certainly wouldn't want to do that if I were trying to get information from you. So choose your location, and it can be a Starbucks or a McDonald's or your home or an office or something like that, but it should be quiet and it should be conducive to you listening to some questions, and so the other person doesn't hear a lot of that extra noise. Always identify yourself and your purpose, just the way you did in the face-to-face interviews, absolutely. But start with identifying yourself and why you're doing this interview. We don't like to be in the dark. What is this information going to be used for? Why are you asking me these questions? That's what we really want to know. And I'm promising you, if you say you're from ECU and you're with this wonderful program and just give a few brief bits about it, most people will be so happy because they would like to help you. So they'll be very happy to help with your interview and to answer your questions. We've already mentioned prepare your face-to-face questions in advance. Absolutely prepare your phone questions in advance too. It's not that you won't have a minute or two to think, but you don't want there to be large gaps of silence while you frantically try to think, okay, what else do I need to know? What didn't I think to write down? Go ahead and write them down, leaving that little bit of leeway that we talked about. I know this is going to sound a little bit contradictory if I say watch your tone and posture and you're on the phone. I understand it's not a video conference, but believe it or not, if you're slouched, if you're lying on the bed, if you're doing some other things while you're on the phone, a lot of that will come through in your tone. So I was listening to someone over in the College of Business the other day, and they said when you interview, if you do a phone interview, you should stand up, because it will make your voice sound more credible, more just, I guess, a little stronger, etc., because you can breathe from your diaphragm. I thought, yeah, I agree with that 100%. I was so glad that he mentioned it to his students, because when you're seated, you can't breathe from your diaphragm and your voice can sound less strong. Not really loud, just strong, credible, confident. So I don't know whether you need to stand up or not, but I wouldn't advise against it. I think it's great to treat a phone interview just as with the same dignity, I guess, and the same strength as you do a face-to-face interview. And I think your tone of voice, wow, it can reflect the fact that you're sitting in your kitchen doing something, or that your kids are running around the background and that you're a little frustrated, but I think that posture can come through too. Speak clearly, a little more slowly than you might in a face-to-face, just because things are amplified. And we want to make sure that people aren't saying, wait, what? Could you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that. And it's not because they're hard of hearing. Your speech is just a little more muddled. Maybe you're a little nervous or you're just excited. And don't use the speaker function. You know what that does. It's just so distorted and it's hard to really hear clearly. And I know we're all on our car phones these days, and I get that, and I do it too, but I can always tell if someone, can't you always tell if someone's on their Bluetooth in their car? Yeah, it's just different. And no side conversations. I used to have a friend, because our children were the same age many years ago, and it was so frustrating to me because every single time she called me or I called her, she was transporting children and they were doing things, and so she would say maybe 3 words, and then she'd say, Robbie, stop it! And then she'd come back to the phone, and then, Sarah, sit down, put your seatbelt on, and then she'd come back, and then so-and-so, or whatever it was, and I thought, we're getting nowhere. This is a waste of my time. So you don't want to do that when you've asked somebody if you can have some time to ask your questions and to gather your information. And then always thank the person for their time, face-to-face and phone interviews. Thank you so much for your information. Once again, I just want to remind you that I'm going to use it for my project, which is affiliated with ECU. I'm grateful for the information that you've given me. Are there any questions that I can answer for you? Boom, you're done. Someone feels really good about that interview. You get fantastic information. It's a win-win for both of you. So that is what I have for interviews. May I answer any questions about anything that I've mentioned today or anything else that you've thought about when it comes to interviewing? Yes, sir.
When it comes to like setting up your questions for the interview, would it be a good idea to have a brief or how much should you describe your product that you're trying to ask them questions about?
Great question. Say it again, Marty.
You're not describing your product.
Nope, please do. Absolutely. I was going to defer to you anyway on that one.
What you need to do, we're going to do some practicing here. If I can get my mentors to kind of spread out amongst the team. Pamela as well, thank you
so
much.
You're so welcome.
But,
is there what type of time frame should we be looking at? I mean, you don't want to probably interview people for an hour, but what's kind of a good cutoff where people start to kind of phase out when they're not paying attention? Is it 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Is there sort of an ideal time for that?
I think it's going to depend, but in my opinion, if you say, now I have just a few minutes, and then it's 15 minutes, people are much more inclined to get impatient. If you say, I'd like to ask you some questions, I won't take much of your time, then I think even 10 minutes would be more than enough. Would you? I mean, I'm going to defer to you again on that one.
Yeah, I think that you're looking for a small amount of time for them, so a few minutes. So you may say 10 minutes. So here's my example of an interview, and we'll get back to your question, Adam. And that is that I'm going to go to Wayne, my new friend Wayne, and say, Wayne, I understand that you are an expert in water bottles. I'm a student at East Carolina University, and I'm working on a project funded by a grant by the National Science Foundation, and I'm just trying to understand water bottle technology. Would you have a few minutes for me to speak with you, or if now's not a good just trying to understand it. Is this helping you, Adam? So you're not saying, I got this great new water bottle, you should buy it. We're here to say, I'm trying to understand the problems, challenges, whatever, with water bottle technology. So now I've told them who I am, where I'm from, I've connected to a grant funded by the NSF, and I just want a few minutes of your time to ask you if you can provide some insight to me about such and so. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so.
So we're not telling them, I got the next greatest water bottle solution that everyone's going to want. Because what we want to do is then pose a question. So I would then go back to Wayne and say, so Wayne, in your role in the expertise of water bottle technology, what do you think is the best thing for it? That challenges are? What makes it difficult for you to do what you do? And that's where Pamela was talking about the active listening, because we've posed a question. I've asked, what are the challenges in water bottle technology? I didn't say, do you have challenges with water bottle technology? It's what are the challenges? What are the challenges you have? And then I'm going to listen. And so I may have 4 or 5 questions in the queue, but it's important to listen to the answers, because it could be that he's answered the next 3 questions for me. But it could also be that you've posed a problem that I never envisioned. You may tell me there are no problems with water bottle technology. Or you know, it would be so much better if we could purify it in a different way, or if we could package it in a different way, or something of that nature. Does that make some sense? At the end of our interviews, we need to say thank you. Thank you, Pamela. Then leave the door open and say, this is very, very valuable to me. if I should have some more questions, would you mind if I got back in touch with you? And most times people will say yes. Most times they'll say yes. So we've kept it short and sweet. You've gathered some insight. It's a problem, it's not a problem. And you try to figure out, if it is a problem, what would make it better. So I wouldn't come to him and say, wouldn't it be better if you had a bottle that sat this way instead of that way? Instead, you'd say, you just ask Wayne, what would make this water bottle better? And you just listen. And then you go on to your next interview and you find out, did that validate it or not? It could be that I will learn that my hypothesis didn't work in my one interview with Wayne. And that may change my thoughts, or it may be that I need to interview some other people to see if he represents the whole sector or there's more out there that I should interview. Does that make some sense? So we've got 10 minutes. Pick someone at your table, and I want you to practice your interview, okay? Because I think for those going out the door who want to call someone up and ask if they can schedule an interview, it may be a little bit nerve-wracking. You may call people up. You may just reach out to them. I don't know, switch sticks. You may go to the karate studio. Is it the right name? Den, something? School. And you may be able to talk to students there. Maybe you teach there. You're partners, right? Okay. Maybe one of you is the teacher? Yeah. I knew this. I'm getting there. Okay. But you may go to some of the other instructors and say, what is the problem with this? Or maybe with some of the other students. Or maybe, and you might be able to grab a quick and dirty interview with them face to face. Or you may need to schedule a time at a time that works for us. So you got 10 minutes. Pick someone at your table, and I want you to practice doing interviews with each other. Okay?